We are live with Conversations with CAGT. For those of you who are joining us today, we want to thank you for being here and hope that you enjoyed last week's presentation with Patty Ghetto-Walden and my cohort Elizabeth. We are excited tonight to bring you Tina Harlow. She is a therapist with experience and expertise in giftedness, which is not something we come by very often in the world of gifted. So I have just been talking this conversation up. I'm very excited to hear what Tina has to say tonight. If you've got a kiddo that is just busy and loves to chat your ear off and you feel like you've constantly got to keep him going, you are going to love this presentation today. I think you're going to love some of the tools and things she has to share with you. So thank you, Tina, for joining us this evening, and I will just turn it over to you.
Okay, thank you so much for inviting me to be part of this series. It's so awesome that you're providing this to people, so thank you. So this is a really difficult time in our world right now. And that being said, I want to thank each of you for being here right now, because I know that anything extra is a lot. So as Randy said, I'm Tina Harlow. I'm a child and family therapist specializing in giftedness in Steamboat Springs, Colorado. And the name of my business is called Guiding Bright. And most of the children with whom I work would fit under the umbrella of twice exceptional, which is having an exceptional ability coupled with an exceptional challenge. And many of the kids that I work with they would meet criteria for ADHD. Some of them are diagnosed and some of them are not, but many of them would meet criteria. So tonight, I'm going to be sharing with you from my experience as a therapist, as a parent, and as a twice exceptional individual myself, who also meets criteria for ADHD. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen now. Just trying to scoot everything. Whoop. Okay. All right, so actually I can move ahead and go to that one. So this is my dear friend, Sabrina, and she recently learned that she has a cataract on the cornea of her right eye and that she's had it since the age of 14. She had no idea that she is actually legally blind. Her left eye was compensating so much for the right eye. So after having the cataract removed, she said that she was in awe at the vividness of the colors and the detail around her. Everything was brighter and clearer. So if you can see in the middle, that cataract there, this is one that's from an injury. Sabrina's cataract was an injury that had been implicitly obstructing her vision for a very long time. She had no idea that it was preventing her from seeing the full vibrancy in the world around her. For the next 20, it might be a little longer, but I'm going to try to keep it close to 20 minutes. For the next 20 to 30 minutes, let's say, we will journey together as we explore the real problem with ADHD, an alternative perspective, and some strategies for mitigating the challenges that lie within these characteristics. By the end of our time together today, you will have a clear lens that will enable your child's vibrancy to fully emerge. And I do want to ask, I'm covering a lot of information today, so I'm hoping we can keep questions till the end. So the 2016 National Survey of Children's Health reported that 9.4% of US children ages 2 to 17 had received an ADHD diagnosis sometime in childhood. Some people believe that that is a big problem, that growth trends are alarming. Some believe that ADHD is overdiagnosed, while others believe that it is sorely underdiagnosed. From my experience in working with children, it is not the prevalence of ADHD that is the problem. It's how we view individuals who possess that set of characteristics. Our cataract is our belief that difference is defective. But we have to remember that our world has changed dramatically in recent years. Technology has altered every aspect of society. Could it be that high energy children possess a specific set of characteristics that make it more difficult for them to adapt to our current world? What message is our society sending to them? I've been working closely with children for the last 30 years, which makes me feel really old. The message that kids are getting is that something is wrong with them. People often say that this stigma can be removed simply by speaking of ADHD in positive terms. But when you're dealing with gifted kids, this doesn't fly. They are sensitive to what others think about them. They're already very hard on themselves. Authenticity matters. Honesty matters. Words hold meaning. Our words around ADHD implicitly devalue them. Our words tell them that they have a deficit, a disorder, an exceptional disability. Our words create yet another layer of marginalization in our society. This perception of ADHD is problematic. However, as is the case with any problem that we face, it is also an opportunity for change. So I want you to imagine a more advanced world, a world in which children talk openly about differences and understood how they complemented one another. A world in which children were taught strategies that enabled them to function at their very best. A world in which children no longer viewed themselves as having something wrong with them. Now imagine a world in which our systems no longer required a child to be diagnosed with a disorder in order for them to get the help that they need. Is this possible? I think that it is. But first of all, we're going to do a little ADHD 101. And we won't spend too much time here for those of you who have ADHD kids and feel like you know this in and out. But there are three, well, first of all, ADHD stands for Attention Deficit Hyperactivity Disorder. And to me, the classification of these subtypes is super helpful. It's inattention, hyperactivity, and then the combination of the two is the other subtype. So the classifications have given us so much information because indeed, I'm not denying the characteristics and that these human beings exist, as I am one of them. But I just have issue with the word disorder that's stuck on the very end. And it's funny because attention deficit really doesn't fully capture it either, because these kids are receiving so much stimuli coming in all around them that it's more like an attention deluge rather than an attention deficit. So those things put aside, I think this is, I think it's actually helpful. So many of you are probably familiar with the ADHD characteristics. So the criteria for meeting an ADHD diagnosis is that a child would need to have 6 in each of the, like if they were going to be diagnosed with inattention, they would need to meet 6 of these criteria that would need to have been occurring for 6 months or longer, and that would need to occur across at least 2 settings. And the same with hyperactivity, and for combined, it can be a combination of 6 that goes across both of them. So the core of my work is in helping children to understand themselves. And I find it very difficult to do with that darn word of disorder stuck on the very, very end. So I want us to take a quick look at these characteristics, and I'm not going to read all of them because I think you're probably familiar with them, but I'm going to just name off a few, and then we'll go from there. So for inattention, you know, it's things that all fit into that same category, like making careless mistakes, difficulty holding attention, easily distracted is a big one, failing to complete tasks, and one that drives parents nuts, appearing not to be listening. And then on the hyperactive ends, these are the ones that really stand out. These are the kiddos, if they're really pretty hyper, they definitely are the ones that they're hard to parent. they're hard to educate because they're so busy. They're so very busy. So these characteristics are all important, but I really like to look at them from an evolutionary perspective, because I don't believe that these things are just this horrible thing that has come on out of the wild blue yonder. And we know that we know that it's highly heritable. We know there's a lot of genetics involved here. So I'm gonna kind of mention this hypothesis, in which some of you may be familiar with. It's called the hunter-farmer hypothesis, and Tom Hartman developed this. And he basically believes that there's a segment of the population that retained more of the original hunter-gatherer genes, and that these individuals are the ones that exhibit the symptoms that we now refer to as ADHD. And the interesting thing about this hypothesis, and due to the time today, I'm not going to get too much more into it, but I've got a resource list that I can share with you, and I can give you some things that you can look at in that regard. So I want us to take a look at the ADHD symptomology and also the potential benefits that they hold. So for inattention, and the ADHD symptoms on the left are directly out of the DSM-5. So for inattention, kids who make careless mistakes, have difficulty holding attention, are easily distracted. So another aspect of what's going on there is that they're constantly scanning the environment. And if you think about that from an evolutionary standpoint, they would have needed to have done that in order to survive. They would have needed to be very, very attuned to everything going on around them. And that didn't mean that they would necessarily be focusing in on one thing, but they would need to scan the environment. And if you look at a lot of our ADHD kids, that's what they are doing quite a bit of the time. And that's for different reasons. Sometimes it's the sensitivity, and they're just highly hypervigilant a lot of the time. And they also have keen observation skills, which of course they would have needed to have back in those early days. So sometimes, you know, we have the ADHD symptom that I mentioned earlier of kids that appear not to be listening. And a lot of times I find that when the kids are not listening, not always, but sometimes they're actually really focused in on something else, because they also have this ability much of the time to be able to hyperfocus, which is to really focus, like they can block out all other distractions, including us as parents and us as teachers. They can block out everything else and focus in on whatever it is that they're interested in, which can be very much a pain in the neck. But later on, it will enable them to really focus in on whatever it is that their work is going to be, and wherever it's going to take them. But for right now, it's something that's really annoying, right? And I get that. And I will just mention, and I'm just going to throw in a little strategy here for those of you who may not be aware of this, but when kids are hyper-focusing on something else and you need to get their attention, the best way is really just to gently touch them on the arm, because sometimes they really just need to break that hyper-focus. So another symptom is fidgeting, right? They're always messing with something, always fidgeting with something at the dinner table, whatever. But the thing is that movement helps us to process information and emotion. And I think many of you have probably already found that when you've got kids at school or kids at home and they're able to have something in their hands, they're actually going to be able to take in the information so much better if they're able to move. And I think our society often thinks of movement as, you know, weight loss and that kind of stuff. But movement is so important for processing things. And I think that's an evolutionary trait as well. So of course, a lot of the kids that are higher psychomotor are really on the go. But again, they would have needed that boundless energy and that stamina way back in those hunter days so that they would be able to track down their prey and be able to provide for their tribe. So the last one I put on here is impulsivity, blurting, acting out, difficulty waiting their turn, interrupting, all those things that make us crazy. But those would actually be essential in order to make quick decisions, right? A lot of times they're going to need to be able to make decisions on the fly, and certainly the ancestors would have needed to do that at times too. And also the willingness to take risks. And we often see this in a negative way, like climbing trees when they're not supposed to, and, you know, maybe getting on the edge of a roof or something, which isn't cool. But also there's emotional risks in getting into a relationship. There's risks in starting up a business. There's a lot of different types of risks, and that impulsivity is sometimes necessary in order to step out and just make that leap. And with this ADHD symptomology, every single one of these things needs to be mitigated. And so please don't hear me saying that just because this is traits that may have existed back in the, and would have been necessary back in the ancient hunter-gatherer days, that we don't have to mitigate them now. We absolutely do, because we're in a different society now. Oop. Okay. So what if ADHD is not a disorder at all, but simply a neurological type? I find these children to be highly complex, so it seems fitting that it may take multiple theoretical constructs to explain their behavior. So now I'm going to bring in our last construct of the day, which is a component of Kazimierz-Dabrowski's theory of positive disintegration. And that component is overexcitability. And I'm just going to go ahead and pull up these. Okay, so Dr. Dabrowski was a Polish psychiatrist and psychologist, and I always pull his theory into every presentation I do because I am such a fan of his work. And his theory of positive disintegration is multifaceted, and we are only going to look at this one piece today just for the sake of time. But I use this a lot with the kids that I work with, so I wanted to bring it in, and this directly correlates with the psychomotor piece. So overexcitability, translated directly from the Polish, is superstimulatability. And I use that term sometimes with kids because it kind of sounds a little bit like a superhero. And some of these characteristics of overexcitability, well, overexcitability is a heightened, it's heightened stimulation in these areas, in these 5 domains. And when kids are experiencing these things, they can be like superpowers in some ways, but they also need to realize that they can be very, very difficult. Difficult and sometimes dark, and sometimes they may need medication, and sometimes they may need therapy. And just because they fit under this umbrella of overexcitability doesn't take away the seriousness of the nature of them. So I'm going to kind of just talk about them a little bit here, just to give you an overview, and I'll come back to psychomotor because we're going to focus in on that one next. So sensual is how kids, it's like a heightened experience through the senses. And so this might be kids that love the feeling of soft things and animals and that kind of stuff. And it could also be a child that really is moved by music or nature. Intellectual are the kids that have just a super high curiosity, and they just want to learn everything about everything. They may not want to learn everything about what's in their classroom, but you know, they have certain things that they take interest in, and they really get into them. And the downside on this is rumination and cognitive hyperactivity can be really difficult, along with a myriad of other things. Imaginational overexcitability is kids who have that really heightened, vivid imagination. A lot of times it's to the point that they have nightmares and even daymares and that kind of thing. And then emotional are the kids that are really, everything is with their feelings, right? Everything is, they do life through feeling. A lot of times they're highly sensitive to other people, and sometimes they can feel the feelings of things around them. Even sometimes they assign feelings to inanimate objects. And I want to mention that all of these domains happen on a continuum. So there is, from low to high, different ways that you can experience them. The higher the manifestation of this, and the more that you have, the more difficult it is. So you can have one of these, or you could have none of these. And this can be also across the board on in the population. It isn't just that they're experienced by the gifted population, but Dabrowski found that the gifted population, they were prevalent in the gifted population. So the schools of thought have often existed outside of each other as far as psychomotor overexcitability and ADHD, and there's been a lot of kind of controversy about that. But there's now a lot of research that's being done and a lot of really close examination of the theory and in relation to ADHD and what they're finding. And I'm speaking specifically, Dr. Chris Wells and Elizabeth Micah are two of the people that have really been looking at where ADHD fits in with psychomotor overexcitability. And they're finding that it does indeed fit there. It belongs there. It lives there. And it's probably more when it's in the higher ranges. So the psychomotor overexcitability that Dr. Dabrowski identified was a surplus of energy, which is manifest through rapid speech, intense physical activity, pressure for action, competitiveness. Also expressions of emotional tension, such as compulsive talking, which I'm sure you guys might have experienced a little bit, impulsive actions, nervous habits like tics or nail biting, workaholism, and acting out. And it's interesting that he focused in on nervous habits because anxiety is often a piece that coexists here. Okay, so we talked about the DSM characteristics of ADHD, but there are other characteristics that are not mentioned in the DSM. So high energy. This is Simone Biles, who is the most decorated American gymnast in the US anyway, I think. Well, I guess that would be, no, she's got Olympic and world championships, 30 of them, 30 medals actually. All right, adventurous. This is Lisa Ling, who has been a war correspondent in Iraq and Afghanistan. This is Kendrick Meeks, whose leadership had him in the House of Representatives from 2003 to 2011. This is an innovator, Bill Gates, and we know that he co-founded Microsoft. Creativity is another aspect that comes along with what we see as ADHD. This is Emma Watson of Harry Potter fame. And she was just in school plays until she went and auditioned for Harry Potter. For those of you who don't know that, what a crazy thing to go from a school play to all of a sudden you're like in everybody's living room and on their phone. Anyway, so crazy. So Emma Watson. And then this guy, talk about hyperfocus. Thomas Edison, Albert Einstein, whose hyperfocus changed everything, right? He had to be able to hyperfocus. I don't even know how many hours he must have spent on his work. Okay, so we're getting into strategies a little bit, and that is one of the strategies. What I just brought up was the celebrities, and then we're going to move into this piece too. Because when we can let kids know about the people that they deem as successful in this world, and we can show them that these things can be used as assets, they can be used as strengths, and that they, in a lot of ways, are essential for some of the great things that happen in the world. So I really like to talk with kids a lot about, about the famous people and so that they can see who that is and be able to connect with them. All right, so I wanted to also put up here medication and supplements. And there are many people, there are kids that find that medication is helpful for them. But I also want to mention that gifted kids they have highly sensitive body systems. And I have had a lot of kids that I've worked with over the years that have had problems, like their bodies have not responded well to medication. And so sometimes parents have to look at other options. So sometimes supplements, some people believe that supplements can help them, although some people don't. And I know there's a lot of, a lot of the scientific evidence isn't out there on supplements. Oh, that's my alarm for myself. So we're 20 minutes in, we're getting there. So if you are interested in looking at supplements as a possibility, I do want to mention a book called The Mood Cure by Julia Ross. And that is a book that really, she has done a lot of studying and a lot of research on various supplements. And again, there are a lot of people that have found benefits from supplements, although the research is still out there. So maybe it's worth taking a look at. I will mention that magnesium is one of the strongest ones that I've seen that seems to have a good impact for calming down the nervous system. All right, the nature connection. A lot of times, children who have characteristics of ADHD have a natural connection with nature. And they don't always have to, but I see it quite a bit, and I see the positive effects that it has on them just being in nature. And probably not just for them, for all of us, but particularly for them. And they're very stimulated by nature. So sunlight itself, you know, the vitamin D in sunlight is helpful for these kids because a lot of times there is a vitamin D deficiency that goes along with ADHD. These kids need so much movement. So physical aerobic exercise, I always say every single day, is really important. And that could be in you know, running, walking, biking. Some of our activities aren't as intensely aerobic, and that aerobic piece is really pretty important. And I find that just connecting children with actually touching, you know, like putting their hands in the creek and touching the grass and laying in the grass and that kind of thing is so calming to the nervous system, and something for them to learn, to understand the positive impacts that simply just being in nature can have on them. All right. So I wanted to also talk about some external supports. So things that could happen outside of the home. A lot of kids find benefit from martial arts, which some of you may already, probably many of you already know about that. You know, there's Taekwondo, there's Jiu-Jitsu, there's like so many options there, and karate. And those are disciplinary, what's the word I'm looking for? Anyway, they provide discipline, you know, they teach discipline, and they also teach like an internal locus of control, which is really important. And I've seen kids make huge progress just in that. Acupuncture, chiropractic, and massage are some potential alternative things that can be helpful. I've definitely heard positive things from different clients along the way of different things that impacted them positively. So those are some. And some internal supports. When I say internal supports, I mean internal as in, you know, inside ourselves, but also things that can be done at home and can be done on our own without needing to go and be part of a class or need to go to a professional. So meditation, thank goodness that's really becoming such a more active part of our society, is our focus on meditation. And that is such, I've seen that make such a tremendous difference as well, because kids really need to learn how to calm themselves and how to, a lot of the responses are in responses to external things going on. So when they're able to go internally, it helps them to have more control in that way. Yoga can be really helpful for children. Music is a very powerful one with ADHD kids. Many of them are very connected with music. And I find that music is not only a stimulation, but it also is it's also calming to the nervous system. And when my kids were younger and they were driving me absolutely nuts, sometimes I would not say anything. I would just leave the room and I would just put music on, and the music did the work. and I was off the hook. So, and sometimes the issue was resolved and the meltdown was cooled off and everything when I came back into the room, because the music was able to do that. That doesn't necessarily work with all kids, but with kids who connect with music, it's a beauty. Tapping, which is part of emotional freedom technique. There's some people that have used that with kids with ADHD and adults and find that to be really helpful as well. Again, that's kind of getting it, tuning into your internal. And it also, Qigong is another one I didn't put on here, but that would be another one. And those cross over a little bit. I wanted to mention diet here. the typical suggestion is protein, right? High protein diet. I find that these kids are greatly impacted by sugar, artificial food dyes, and caffeine. And sometimes, and adults are too, and we don't realize it. You know, a lot of times we are highly sensitive to this stuff as well, but we have just continued to put it in our bodies that we don't notice anymore. But, you know, if you're having a lot of trouble sleeping, you know, sometimes caffeine way earlier in the day actually can have an impact. It can, depending on the sensitivity of the person. So I think it's always important to look at diet, because it does matter. It really does matter. And I find that dairy sometimes can be one of those things that takes a toll as well. Not for everyone, but I've seen the cutting out of dairy to be very helpful sometimes. It's best if you do a little Google search and look up foods that are rich in tyrosine. Those types of foods are known to be helpful with ADHD. If any of you aren't familiar with the Feingold program, they've got a really good program where they've researched all kinds of foods and the impact on ADHD. And they have an entire diet that you can look at. All right, systems. This is what I am working with kids with the most, is just to develop systems in the areas that they're struggling. So the system needs to be specific, very, very specific to what it is that they're struggling with, and it needs to be something that they create on their own. We parents and educators as well tend to create systems for kids, and they just don't have the buy-in. But they need to learn. This word needs to be, if you have a child with ADHD or with those symptoms, systems needs to be in your vocabulary, because they need to learn that for everything they're struggling with throughout their life, they will need to develop a system. So we have a system. We hang our keys up beside the door before we walk out the door, right? Or, you know, when you walk in the door, I guess. Maybe you have your bag full of soccer things sitting at the door when you go out to your soccer game, you know, like to just create systems that keep you from losing track of things. So you don't have to be thinking about these things all the time, because I always tell kids, your brain needs to be able to focus on bigger things. All this minutia, all these little things, deal with them through systems. All right, we are not going to get into all of these, don't worry, but I just wanted to put it up here. Clearly, executive functioning is impacted with ADHD. So, you know, executive functioning is in the prefrontal cortex, which is responsible for the things, you know, they are the tasks, they are the drivers of how we accomplish tasks. Sorry, I got tongue-tied on that one. These are the things that we need in order to accomplish tasks on a daily basis. There we go. And so all of these different ones are essential, and that would be a whole different presentation. So there are executive functioning coaches out there, executive function coaches. You know, there's a lot of information on executive functioning and suggestions for that. But most of the time, the answer is systems. All right, so the last one that I wanted to mention here is how to clean up my mess. And I put this in here because not just with ADHD, I think anytime a child has a diagnosis of something that is a challenge, sometimes we parents can overprotect them. And sometimes we can even allow them to slide off the hook a little bit. And I just want to say really clearly that the ADHD diagnosis, or these characteristics, even if it's undiagnosed, should not be an excuse for treating people poorly, ever, ever. Our values need to be, we always treat people kindly. And when they screw up, because we all screw up, then they have to just figure out how to clean up their mess. Because sometimes the trouble is that there is no closure to these things. Sometimes they just go on, and the kid just carries it around and feels bad about it, just like we adults do as well. So if they go through a process of cleaning up their mess, and I actually have a form on this that I could send to you if you want it, but It's basically getting them to think after they, let's go through a scenario here. Let's say that a child says something mean to a peer, okay? Blurting, it happens all the time, right? A kid says something really mean to a peer. They're just not thinking, it comes flying out of their mouth. And then the other kid gets upset, they're in trouble. Anyway, you know, it goes on and on. So you're not going to deal with it right after school or whatever, because the child's going to be escalated and they're going to be stressed out. But when everybody's calmed down and settled, you want to talk with them and maybe have them fill out a piece of paper or do a drawing or something and think about how their behavior, who their behavior impacted and how it impacted the people around them, and what can they do to make it right? Like, can they do something nice for the person? What can they do? So I think we always have to hold kids accountable when they do something that really harms someone else, you know, in some way, while at the same time saying, I know this is hard. I know this is hard for you, and you're going to get this, okay? You're going to get this. You're still a kid. All right. So right now, our society is in the process of removing the cataract that has been obstructing our vision for such a very long time. It is my hope that in the not too distant future, each of us will be able to clearly see the beautiful vibrancy that exists within all of our differences. As recent months have shown, together we are capable of big things. Please join me in being a catalyst for change in our spheres of influence. And I just wanted to mention, for any of you that haven't, I know probably some of you have seen this, but it's a free ebook that I put together a few years ago. It's a collaborative effort between 29 experts in the field of giftedness, and it's a great resource. And you can find that on my website at www.guidingbright.com. And that's all. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Tina. Yes, if you have not downloaded Tina's ebook, Helping Gifted Children Thrive, you need to now. It's excellent. It's a great resource, and I've appreciated using it in my own practice with gifted kids as a gifted coordinator in a small school district, and referencing it regularly. So we have a couple questions from the live feed. And if anybody else has any questions that they would like to ask, we'll go ahead and field those now. So start typing them in the comments while we go on and see what people have asked. There's a question above. Let me find it. I have to scroll up a bit on one of my computers here. I think it was Lisa asked about, and I apologize, I'm trying to scroll back and find it.
No worries.
It is not letting me scroll back to find it. Let me go back. She asked something about how we're defining gifted, and Lisa commented that, you know, she tested with a high IQ but didn't seem to have any symptoms of ADHD, and I'm wondering if part of that conversation about the overexcitability is those overlaps.
Yeah. So, and I don't know if this is answering it, but everyone with high IQ and everyone that's gifted definitely does not have ADHD. So I definitely wanted to make that really clear. And they do not all have high psychomotor overexcitability. Some people who are gifted have no psychomotor overexcitability at all. And so you could have, it varies so much. You could have one of those overexcitabilities, or you could have 5 of them. It's more rare that you would have that many, that you would have 5. And again, those people really struggle. But I just want to make sure I'm not equating high IQ with ADHD.
Okay, somebody found it and copied and pasted it for me. Okay, yes.
Okay.
Yeah, I think, you know, I think there's a lot of, and I see this in my own practice sometimes. Sometimes those overexcitabilities to someone who's not somebody who's a specialist in diagnosing these things can look like what we think of as ADHD, or you know, the stereotypical autism, or oops, sorry about that. But I think, you know, we have to say there's overexcitabilities and there's diagnosed.
Yeah.
I feel like there's an overlap that can be misconstrued if we're not talking to a medical professional.
I know. And I brought in a lot of information in this. I was trying really hard to see what I could ditch, and I couldn't ditch any of the theoretical pieces because they're how I do my work, right? It's so hard. But it's basically would probably be good to do more reading. I would not want anybody just going off of this presentation alone, like there's just a lot of information that it would be good for people to have. And I do have a resource list. The book Living with Intensity is a really good one for looking at the overexcitabilities. And there's others out there as well. But ADHD from what I've been reading with recent things that are coming out and speaking with colleagues and stuff, that Dabrowski didn't have the language of ADHD when he was developing his theory, but those characteristics actually seem to be falling under psychomotor overexcitability. Like ADHD is a component of that doesn't. Everybody who has psychomotor overexcitability doesn't have ADHD, but ADHD would fit under there if it's on the very high end of manifestation. Oh, I hope that makes sense.
No, it totally does.
Okay.
Totally does. Okay. There were maybe one other question. Again, trying to scroll back in the comments isn't really being very friendly with me right now for some reason. I've never had a problem before, and now I am. I asked a question actually, when you were talking about cleaning up the messes, and I thought about restorative justice. You were talking about, okay, what have I done? Who has it hurt? Who has it affected? How can I fix it? How can I rectify the situation? And I wanted to know what your take was on restorative justice programs as a part of a school discipline plan or a school reform plan, or what was your take on that?
Well, and I granted there are so many different situations that happen across the board. I love restorative justice myself. I really love it, but I can imagine that there could be situations where maybe it's brought out in the wrong situation or something like that. So everything is so individual, but my experiences with restorative justice with children that I work with have been really good. I've had really good experiences with it. And it's that concept. Thank you for mentioning restorative justice. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I feel like sometimes, especially with children who tend to be frequent flyers maybe on our radar because of maybe their hyperactivity or their inattentiveness, I feel like sometimes that consistent reprimand, rather than ability to rectify a situation, but just being reprimanded and redirected, reprimanded and redirected.
Yeah,
I feel like that can sometimes almost diminish a kid's confidence in school and confidence in themselves and reinforce that something's wrong with me.
Yeah.
Okay, I just got a text that there's another question. Okay, Lisa, yes. So Lisa has a question. Is gifted as high potential, intelligence, music, art, etc., but not necessarily ADHD. So Lisa, we're talking about twice exceptional students today. Those students who are, and children who are diagnosed with ADHD, either the inattentive, the hyperactive, or the combined, which thank you, Lisa, for clarifying those three different types. That was interesting to me. But she's trying to understand your definition of the term gifted. Are we also talking about gifted kids who are also ADHD? And yes, that is that.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
Yep. Which falls
both
exceptional.
I hope that clarified.
Sorry for the
I think that Tina clarified this, the conversation about overexcitability is as a component of some people who are gifted, and also as a component of people who have ADHD. There's a lot of angles.
It's a lot.
Individuals.
It's a lot. And there's so much more information that, of course, there's not time to get into. And so I really would encourage people to look at some other resources. There's also, anyway, I've got the resource list that
Absolutely. We will
will
share
go
that.
out. And I would encourage you to look into those things further, for sure. Because the different if a child, again, it can go across, it's not just in gifted land, they can live in other places as well, the overexcitabilities. But the kids who experience them, you know, the high ones, again, they're the ones that do come on the radar. They are, you know, that's why I'm saying with high psychomotor, they're likely the ones with the ADHD, right? Because they're on the radar, they're struggling.
Oh, absolutely. The students that I have on my caseload definitely are that psychomotor. When I talk about overexcitabilities to my students, they're like, oh, that's me. That's me. That's absolutely me. I can't sit still. I'm always drumming. My teacher's always yelling at me to stop doing this. I'm always tapping my toes or wheeling back my chair. Or I have those bands on my thing. Or when they can't move their bodies, they tend to move their mouths, which can get them in trouble too.
Yes, yes.
That is true. I would agree. And let me see if there's any other questions. Looks like, oh, Lisa says, okay, got it. Thank you. I'm glad we could clarify that.
And Lisa, if you have other questions, because I know this probably brought up more questions than it answered because I brought in so many things, but if you can always reach out to me and email me too, and I would definitely respond. And we can
I think your resource list is going to be super helpful. I can't wait to check some of those out, because I was really the hunter gatherer.
Hunter-Farmer hypothesis, yeah.
That was, I love that you showed the benefits of that. And I think that's a great lens to look at our kiddos with ADHD who are gifted, and say, how can we harness those and help them bring the positive out in those traits and really use that hyper focus. I mean, obviously you showed all these wonderful people who use those traits to be successful. And I think that we need to kind of look at it from that lens. And I think that's the power of your message today, was just look at those traits from a positive lens, and how can we help our students harness that and be successful and be creative and be innovators.
And I think it would be my dream is that someday the schools would incorporate, you know, like that kids would understand how each other functions, and like, oh man, we need somebody to hyper focus on this right now. How about you do this? And you know, like, or somebody with dyslexia, like we need that viewpoint, right? Yeah. I mean, it would be really cool for us to all really be able to talk openly about differences without people feeling so ostracized, because everybody brings so much to the table with all their uniqueness, right? So anyway, I'll stop off my.
No, I absolutely agree. And, you know, I think this generation of kiddos that are coming up that are, you know, late elementary, middle school right now, what I'm observing is an acceptance of each other in a way that was never, you know, there's still bullying and there's still the things that happen in schools, but I do feel like there's more of an acceptance of, oh, you know what, that's just how he is, and it's okay. And we're going to roll.
I think you're right. I think we're moving in a very good direction. I do. Well, we've got a lot going on in the world right now. We got a lot of work to do, but I think there's a lot of positive things happening.
I think openness about mental health and openness about neurological differences is really.
Yes. Neurodiversity. Yeah, for
sure.
Neurodiversity
has really helped our kiddos understand each other and be a little more tolerant. So
yeah.
But we just got to work on all other kinds of tolerance.
I know, right? Right.
Well, I appreciate it. I don't think that we have any more questions coming in at the moment. Let me just do one quick check for a last question. And it looks like we're good. So,
okay. Awesome.
Tina, I really appreciate you taking time out of your evening to do this. It's windy here out on the Eastern Plains, so, you know, I'm stuck inside anyway.
Yeah, and we had snow here this morning. Seriously, I was like, no, we have snow. No. So yeah.
No snow. I saw 8 inches in red feather. So I'm ready for warmer weather and no winds. So
I'm with you.
I appreciate you sharing such a positive message this evening and clarifying. I know there's sticky questions and you've shared a lot of information. We will share your resource list on our website, as well as a recording of this live. We'll get that all shared, and folks who are watching right now, you can go to the coloradogifted.org to access that. And you could also access that right here on our Facebook page. This recording will be available. So Tina, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you, and have a great evening. We'll see you all next week at 5 o'clock. Bye.
Bye.
Okay, I think I'm done.